In the early 1970s, home audio was restrained, respectable, measured, predictable. Most receivers delivered 15 watts per channel, maybe 30 if you're doing well for yourself, and for a long time, that was enough. Enough to fill a living room, enough to enjoy a record, enough to keep the neighbors friendly. Hi-fi wasn't about dominance yet. It was about balance, warmth, taste. But beneath that calm surface, something was changing. Records were being mastered louder. Speakers were getting bigger and less forgiving. Listeners were turning the volume knob just a little further every year. Then, in 1974, Pioneer stopped pretending restraint was the goal. They released the SX1010, 100 watts per channel, continuously, honestly, into real speakers. It wasn't just a loud receiver, it was a line in the sand. Pioneer didn't raise expectations. They forced every other manufacturer to confront a new reality. Power had become prestige. From that moment forward, the industry entered an escalation that would last nearly a decade, a period defined by excess, experimentation, and engineering bravado. This wasn't marketing, this was physics. Heat, steel, transformers pushed to their limits. Welcome to the Monster Receiver Wars. Chapter 1, Kenwood KR9600, Power for the Committed. Before the arms race reached its most absurd heights, Kenwood made a calculated move. In 1976, they introduced the KR9600. At 160 watts per channel, it wasn't chasing the absolute peak of the market, and it didn't need to. What mattered was how that power was delivered, clean, stable, into 8 ohms without drama. At over 50 pounds, the KR9600 carried real mass, not decorative weight, structural weight. Dual phono inputs weren't a luxury, they were an assumption. Dual tape loops acknowledged the serious listeners recorded, compared, experimented. And their tuner section, often overlooked, was among the most sensitive of its era. Then there was the price. $750 in 1976. With a federal minimum wage of $2.30 an hour, that represented more than 300 hours of labor, over 2 months of full-time work, for a single component. This wasn't casual consumption. The KR9600 represented the moment power became accessible, not cheap, but achievable. It proved you didn't need the most extreme machine on the market to enter the new era. Kenwood didn't start the war, but they armed a lot of people for it. Chapter 2, Technics SA1000, The Point of No Return. If Kenwood showed restraint, Technics showed none. By 1977, most manufacturers were still digesting the implications of triple-digit wattage. Technics didn't digest anything. They escalated. The SA1000 delivered 330 watts per channel. Not peak, not optimistic, 330. This wasn't incremental progress, it was a reset. At nearly 87 pounds, the SA1000 wasn't designed to blend into a living room, it anchored it. Its massive power supply and output stage existed for one reason: to prove there was no practical ceiling yet. The price reflected that ambition, roughly $1,700, months of income for the average buyer. The SA1000 wasn't marketed as reasonable, it was marketed as ultimate. And it marked the moment the Monster Receiver Wars stopped being about listening rooms and started flirting with professional reinforcement. It forced the industry to ask a dangerous question. If this exists, what comes next? Chapter 3, Marantz 2600, The Experiment. By 1978, things were no longer subtle. The arms race had crossed a line. Power figures were no longer about listening. They were about statement. Marantz leaned into it. The Model 2600, 300 watts per channel. But raw power wasn't the headline. Marantz added something no one else dared to include. Not meters, not lights. A built-in oscilloscope. A laboratory instrument, embedded directly into a living room receiver. A glowing blue eye that didn't suggest performance, it showed it. Waveforms dancing in real time. You weren't just hearing music, you were watching electricity become sound. And it came at a cost. This receiver ran so hot that passive cooling wasn't enough. Marantz had to install a temperature-activated cooling fan. This wasn't refinement. This was engineering pushed to the edge of domestic sanity. Production was limited. Only a few thousand units were ever made. At $1,600 in 1978, it wasn't just expensive, it was exclusive. Marantz wasn't building a consumer product, they were conducting an experiment. How far could a receiver go before it stopped being a receiver at all? And the fact that it worked terrified everyone else. Chapter 4: Sony STR V7 Precision over Brute Force. Sony entered the battlefield quietly. No spectacle, no shock numbers, no glowing scopes. Just engineering. The STR V7 delivered 150 watts per channel, with real-world peaks pushing far beyond its rating. But power wasn't the headline. Precision was. This was a receiver built for listeners not flexing. A built-in moving coil phono stage. Rare, expensive, and completely unnecessary for casual buyers, but irresistible to serious vinyl collectors. A toroidal transformer, chosen not for size but for stability, efficiency, and lower noise. Weighing just under 50 pounds, the STR V7 didn't intimidate. It invited careful listening. No bravado, no excess heat, no spectacle. At $900, it was still a serious investment, but one aimed at longevity rather than dominance. Sony wasn't trying to win the war. They were building a reference point. While others shouted, Sony refined. And in a battlefield obsessed with size, they proved restraint could still sound enormous. Chapter 5: Pioneer SX 1980 Strategic Dominance. Technics dropped 330 watts. The room went quiet. Pioneer didn't panic. They didn't rush. They released the SX 1980, 270 watts per channel. That number wasn't conservative, it was calculated. By the late 1970s, the FTC had changed the rules. Advertised power now had to be measured across the full frequency spectrum, at low distortion with both channels driven. No tricks, no peak numbers, no marketing gimmicks. And Pioneer knew their ratings would survive scrutiny. 300 continuous watts were common. Short-term bursts approached 460. Not on paper, on the bench. This wasn't excess, it was headroom. 78 pounds, heat sinks that looked industrial, a transformer the size of a dinner plate, built not to impress, but to endure. It wasn't about chasing the highest number, it was about control. Control of distortion, control of heat, control of reliability. While others reached for spectacle, Pioneer built something that couldn't be argued with. They didn't win by exaggeration, they won by outlasting the test. Chapter 6: The Sansui G-33000 The Limit of the Form. Every escalation has a breaking point. For home audio, this was it. By the late 1970s, manufacturers had run headlong into a physical problem. There was only so much heat, current, and mechanical stress that could be managed inside a single chassis. Sansui's answer was simple: they stopped trying. The G-33000 was not a single receiver, it was a system. A dedicated preamplifier and tuner in one unit, handling signal selection, tone shaping, and radio reception, isolated from vibration, heat, and electrical noise, and a completely separate power amplifier, built for one job only, delivering current. No compromises, no shared transformers, no thermal crowding. This wasn't convenience engineering, it was professional logic applied to the home. By separating two low-level signal paths from the brutal demands of a 300 watt per channel power stage, Sansui achieved stability and control that simply wasn't possible in a traditional all-in-one receiver at this scale. The power amplifier alone weighed enough to remind you that electricity was not abstract, it was a force. Massive heat sinks, enormous power reserves, pure DC power circuitry, and over 100 pounds combined. This wasn't something you casually placed on a shelf. It was installed. And that was the point. The G-33000 wasn't built for average listeners. It was built as a statement. that this was the outer boundary of what the receiver era could achieve before it collapsed under its own ambition. Sansui didn't end the monster receiver wars. They showed everyone exactly where the wall was. Why the wars ended. No escalation lasts forever. Not because anyone decided to stop, but because the conditions that made it possible disappeared. The FTC demanded honesty. Power ratings now had rules. Continuous output, full frequency range, both channels driven. Marketing numbers shrank, even as engineering improved. Then came the oil crisis. Energy stopped being abstract. Manufacturing costs climbed. Shipping heavy equipment across oceans no longer made economic sense. By the turn of the decade, efficiency replaced bravado. Design priorities shifted: lower heat, lower idle draw, smaller power supplies. Not because engineers lost ambition, but because the market demanded restraint. Digital technology accelerated the change. Integrated circuits reduced part counts. New formats favored consistency over headroom. Smaller systems reached a larger audience. The incentives were different now. The monster receivers didn't fail. They simply belonged to a set of conditions that no longer existed. And when those conditions changed, the war ended. We don't collect these receivers because they make sense. They don't. By every modern metric, efficiency, accuracy, size, they've been surpassed. A contemporary Class D amplifier, small enough to fit in a jacket pocket, can deliver similar power with lower distortion and far less wasted energy. But numbers have never been the reason these machines endure. What modern equipment lacks is presence. These receivers occupy space, physically and emotionally. Their weight is felt before they're ever powered on. The resistance of a volume knob, the warmth of a dial light, the low mechanical click of a relay engaging. These are tactile experiences, not abstractions. They demand participation. For many of us, they also carry memory. The living room of our childhood, the soft glow of a faceplate in the evening, the ritual of removing a record from its sleeve, brushing away dust, lowering the needle by hand. Music wasn't optimized then. It wasn't streamed or shuffled. It was chosen. These machines weren't background appliances. They were the center of the room. Families gathered around them. Conversations paused for them. Silence was part of the experience. And when you power one on today, decades later, that sensation returns. The hum, the warmth, the sense that the machine is working with you, not disappearing behind convenience. The monster receiver wars weren't about excess for its own sake. They were about a moment in time when engineers were allowed, even encouraged, to push limits without apology, when durability mattered, when overbuilding was a virtue. This is why we restore them, why we preserve them, why we lift them carefully knowing their weight. They aren't just relics. They're reminders of an era when technology felt human, imperfect, ambitious, and built to last.